And it's also very favorite. It's doing well.
Popcorn. All right. Good morning, dear friends. Welcome. Thank you for joining us on Monday. It is the 15th of Shavat, Tu B'Shvat, or Chamisha Asar B'Shvat, as you might call it. It is the 17th of January, which means that this year today is Martin Luther King Day. I know yesterday I spoke about my affinity to Martin Luther King and Martin Luther King Day, but today we're celebrating it today, or the Welt is celebrating it today. And we are gathered here to study the entire Talmud, one page, one line at a time. We're presently studying Masechet Shabbos, chapter 11, Sadik Ches Amud Aleph, that's 98a. We are dedicating our learning for the good health and well-being of our members of the Chabura, their households, and for good news for all of Klal Yisrael. And we are continuing to learn the Zechus, the complete and speedy recovery for Leah, Basrita, Malka Basrivka, Chaim Baruch Eliezer Ben Rusa Esther, Ludmila Bas Najada, and all of Klal Yisrael to only have good news, healthy news, and happiness. Again, today is Tu B'Shvat, Chamisha Asar B'Shvat, a good day, a day of celebration for the Jewish people, a day of appreciation for God's gift, beautiful fruits. Today we could possibly be caught taking the gift of peirot, of fruits, delicious fruits for granted. But as we mentioned in passing, the reason why folks in the Alter Shtetl had a thing for dried fruit on Tu B'Shvat was probably not so much because Tu B'Shvat is a day for dry fruit, but because you had a very hard time getting just about any fresh fruit. And we've heard edut from folks on this group that maybe an apple was considered a massive celebration. An orange was a treat that you maybe saw once or twice a year, and it came at great expense. You needed to have a connection in a warehouse that they could siphon off an orange or two, and then maybe you could get one on the black market. It wasn't something that was a common event. And today you can go to the store, and notwithstanding the supply chain shortages and whatever they talk about, with all of that, you could still go to the store and have a beautiful spread of fruits. And especially in Florida, even in the winter, you can get fresh fruits on our local trees. And so we have a lot to be grateful for. But of course, we turn our attention to Eretz Yisrael and pray for good news there on this day of Chamisha Asar B'Shvat, the day that we focus on the fruits of our Holy Land. And so that will be today's dedication. We are going to travel back in time now, approximately 3,000 years, to a conversation between God Almighty, Hashem, and Moshe Rabbeinu, wherein Moshe is instructed to construct a tabernacle to facilitate the transportation, to help move the tabernacle, the Mishkan, from point A to point B. They had wagons, and the heaviest item that was carried by the tribe or the family of Merari, it's not an Italian name. Merari was the sons of Levi, and they were tasked with carrying the bulky, heavy parts of the Mishkan, and primarily the krushim, the beams, which were the frame and support for the Mishkan. They carried it on a wagon, and this wagon and the beams are extremely important for our topic of Shabbos, because the wagons, the beams, become many of the building blocks that inform our perspective and our notion of carrying on Shabbos. Namely, the place where the beams were located were in the camp, a Rishus Harabim, a public domain, where 600,000 plus folks were passing through. And the wagon was a private, elevated domain that had many of the criteria to be a Rishus HaYachid. Yesterday, we were trying, and the day before that, and I'll give you an update at the end about what I think we should do for Sunday. But anyways, Rav has two contradictory statements. On one hand, he seems to acknowledge that there is public domain around and under the wagon. On the other hand, he says there was no roofed-in place around the wagon. And our process to try to make sense of the two entails finding gaps or laps or spaces under and around the wagon that are not covered. Because if the totality of the wagon and what was around it was covered by a halachic roof, well, then we would be compelled to conclude that there was a roofed-in public domain, or there was no such thing as a public domain, which would be a problem for Rav's statements. And so we had a variety of ways to understand the setup, the way that the krushim, the beams were stacked and were aligned, and we found a method that maybe they were aligned where there were gaps. That would work primarily if we imagine that the beams that were the walls of the Mishkan, although usually we think of beams as these measly 2x4s or 4x4s or whatever, these were much more imposing and impressive than that. They were 1 amma thick. Mark, are you on? What's 1 amma thick? A foot, approximately. Just
18, 19 inches.
A foot and a half by 2+ feet. We're talking about solid pieces of wood. It was probably not that easy to carry, but that's not what's so interesting. We discussed the possibility that it tapered up to the top. And so they had this sloping design, which probably may have been helpful for the aesthetics of the tabernacle. It also probably made the Meraris burden a little lighter just by default. Whatever you slimmed off, they weren't carrying. But for our purposes, it allowed for significant gaps in the stacks of wood that may have been the public domain that was in proximity to the wagon that we described. If you don't say that the crushim tapered off, well, then you'd be compelled to discuss the wagon when there was no beams upon it. Then it would be considered a public domain. But once the beams were placed on it, it would be considered covered. And if we understand correctly, then that would be considered a carmelis, not a public domain, as discussed a few days ago. Today, I don't want to rehash beyond my introduction and trying to give us some clarity of the subject. I don't want to rehash that aspect of the conversation. Today, we're going to go into the Gemara Tzadik Ches Amud Aleph, and we're going to continue to explore in a more basic discussion the design of the crushing. Then we're going to talk about the tarp, the canvas. It wasn't either really. It was the skin, hide, or woven wool hair covering of the Mishkan, which is probably what really can be described as the tent, the ohel, the Mishkan. And so that's what we're going to discuss today. As usual, I am grateful for your assistance. Well, I'm always grateful, but particularly with today's Gemara, those that have a little bit more of a mathematical or engineering way of processing information, your assistance and clarity will be helpful to me. So no pressure, but always value your help over here. All right, here we go. Tana Rabbanan, a brisa that's going to discuss the and I stand corrected. We're already on Tzadik Ches Amud Beis. That's 98b. Tana Rabbanan. Our sages taught in a brisa. Kuroshim, the beams. Milamaton avyon amma. At the base, at the bottom part, it was an amma wide. Umilmalon kolim v'holchim. However, as you get to the higher top of the beam, just in case you want to remember I showed you a picture of this stacked on the wagon. I told you it was upside down. So the fat part, the wide part is on the bottom, and then it tapers upwards. Ulamala kolim, it becomes narrower. It disappears. V'holchim ad ke'etzba, and the top is real pointy, almost the size of a finger or a finger breadth. Shenemar, where do I infer this? It's biblical. It says, Yihiyu samim al roishoi. It'll end on the top. The word samim has possibly a connotation of getting more narrow. Why? Ulahalanu amar tamu nichrasu. Because later on, in the book of Yeshua, let's take a look at the pasuk. In the book of Joshua, it talks about how something could run out, slowly trickle, or come to a halt. The waters came down from upstream, piled in a single heap in a great way at Adam, the town next to Tzorson, flowing downwards. It ran out completely. And so the word tamim, which means to run out, to conclude, to dissipate, would kind of describe the way something seems to continuously taper off till it's poof, it's no more. Rashi, matamu hanemar lahalon, just as this word is used in the book of Joshua. It means lashon kaliyah, finish, disappear, dissipate. Aftamim ha'amar kan lashon kaliyah. So to here, it finishes off into nothingness. I'm looking for, cut off. So this is Divrei Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Yehuda is of the opinion that these krushim tapered off to a point. Not everybody agrees, as you may recall. Rabbi Nechemia says, no way. Kishem shemilamaton avyan ama. The krushim, the beams, on the bottom they're 1.5 amas wide by 1 amma thick. Kach milamalon, so to above avyan ama, they are the same. They are in amma on the top. Shnemar yachtav. They are like a typical beam, solid, the same dimensions, the top to the bottom. And it says in the pasuk yachtav. Which pasuk? Here's the pasuk. 1 second. Yusamim al roishoi. Let's take a look here as well in the description of Vayiyu soyamim milamata. V'yachtav yiyu samim al roishoi. They shall match at the bottom and conclude the same way in the top. The word samim, according to Rabbi Nechemia, which I think means matching, like a.
Rabbi,
I'm sorry, no. Hold on, I'm sorry.
Does this relate to the way how Noah was described? He was Ishtam.
Yeah, sure.
Yes and no. Generally speaking, the word, the word tam or tamim, the shoresh can mean a few different variations of the same idea. Simplicity is, here we're saying it tapers off, it concludes, it finishes.
I thought it meant fullness.
That's the problem. Tam could mean wholesomeness. It could also mean simplicity. And simplicity means that the complexity, the sophistication is gone. So we could argue the shoresh and languages, but we could make the argument that it is the same shoresh. Because tam could mean complete, wholesome, but completeness in the context of that word, tam, by a person, means they're entirely with you. They're entirely accepting, which I think is an absence of sophistication. Again, I may be wrong, but that's my impression that it could be the same word, but it doesn't add a lot of depth, but it is the same word. So it says v'yu soyamim milamata v'yachtav. They should be yachtav, together. What does it mean together? Rabbi Nechemia says they should be identical. They should be the same. And so this is a machlokes, a debate between Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Nechemia about the design of the krushim. Now, this is obviously a very fundamental question. What did the Mishkan look like? Unfortunately, we do not have any of the original krushim of the Mishkan to inspect, to check. And so we could do our best to dig into our tradition and to examine the psukim and hope to find the clue. Rashi Shneimar Yachtav, Kulan Shavais. They were all identical. We're the same from the top to the bottom. So here, this Gemara is quoted in the Midrashim, but anyways, I don't think that adds much to our conversation. All right. So that's the debate. We quoted it earlier in our discussion about how the krushim the beams were on the wagons, and here we're quoting the original brisa that records a machlokes between Rabbi Yehuda, Rabbi Nechemia. Just let's remember again, Rabbi Yehuda says they tapered off to the top, they finished off. They seem, because think about it, something that slopes seems to just disappear at the top. It's like you took a razor and you cut until there was nothing left. Now, in truth, of course, we know it was designed to be this way, but conceptually, that is how we would imagine it. So the Gemara now is going to probe. Each rabbi has to defend his position and do something with the other rabbi's biblical proof. In other words, if I tell you that the Torah supports my view and you tell me the Torah supports your view, you're going to have to explain why you don't embrace my interpretation. I'm going to have to tell you why I don't accept your interpretation. And so that's what the Gemara is doing now. The Gemara challenges Rabbi Yehuda. It says tamim. Tamim seems to teach us that they taper off. So how does Rabbi Nechemia not agree that it tapers off? So the Gemara answers for Rabbi Nechemia, Hahu, the Leiso Shalmin, V'lo Leiso de Nisra. When you bring the wood to construct the beams, it needs to be made from a single piece of wood. It shouldn't be of different pieces of wood. It shouldn't be, we're not talking about press board here, but it should be a single beam. If you think to the shul, the code, a beam has to be a certain size, has to be a single length, and there have to be supports. And if you attach two different pieces of wood, it changes the whole equation. So anyways, the Torah is saying tamim. Each keresh should be a single piece of wood. And that's what tamim means. Whole, not identical, not hole on the top and on the bottom. I'm sorry, not finishing off. And so the professor here, we have more explicitly your interpretation. In other words, I suppose we might say the Gemara here is correcting me. I tried to say it was the same word, but perhaps it means very much a different one. Either tamim means concluding, disappearing, or it means whole. If it means whole, according to Reb Nechemia, well, then it can't teach us that it should taper off. Rashi, keresh echad mi beis chatichas. You don't want to have one beam made of two pieces of wood. Okay, Rabbi Yehuda, you say that it tapers off. What are you going to make of Yachtav, which tells us that it needs to be uniform? This teaches us that they should not be askew. They should be perfectly aligned. Sometimes when you piece together wood gets warped or whatever, and you can have it not perfectly flush and smooth. Rashi, you might have it echad lefanim ve'echad lechutz. Elamoishiv hakrashim mechuvanin ze'itzel. They should be smooth, flush, streamlined. Sheyamdu hakrashim mechuvanim oiveh shel zeh keneged oiveh shel zeh. It should be perfect. It should be with precision. Rabbi Steinsaltz here. It should not be askew. So each rabbi essentially takes the word that was the proof to the other rabbi and say, I define it differently, and it teaches us a different facet, a different halacha. And so they each hold their own. One deya, one opinion says that it was identical on the top and the bottom, the same width, the same thickness. And the other says, no, it tapers off to the top. Rabbi Yehuda says it tapers off. Rabbi Nechemia says it was the same from the top to the bottom. All right, now we're going to get a little more complicated. So let's see if we could find the right images. First of all, I want to just show you. This is the Schottenstein depiction of what the Krushim must have looked like. You'll take a look. There were these two, what do you call them? Sockets? Not sockets. That's what went into the sockets. Anyways, these two protruding posts or whatever, they plugged in to the sockets. According to Rabbi Nechemia, it's the same 1 amma by 1.5 ammas, right? You see it's 1 amma at the bottom. The thickness, the width is 1.5 ammas, and it's identical, the same size on the top. The additional stuff that you see here were the plugs that ran through and additional beams for carrying them. If you want to take a look at Rabbi Steinsaltz's notes, this beam has 2 rings into which the upper and lower bar were inserted. It's not really relevant here, but when we're talking about stacking, there was an incentive to stack it on its narrow side. This was yesterday's discussion, because you have these beams and other things that could possibly be not so conducive for stacking in the more instinctive manner. Here's just another perspective of how the sockets and the plugs connected. This will be our discussion soon, not yet. Here's what I wanted to show you. A bird's eye view, it's cut off a little bit, but you see, if you hold like Rabbi Nechemia, the entire Mishkan has the same thickness. This is not a major chiddush, whereas over here, if you see it tapers up to a point, you have much less space at the top. It's going to become relevant soon, and when we get to there, I'm going to need our engineers to help me out. All right, The Gemara now, I'm sorry if should I stay there a little longer? You want to see it again? Rabbi Nehemiah has a thicker top and Rabbi Yehuda has a more narrow top. At this time, it's just an aesthetic question.
That doesn't look it looks narrower all the way down, doesn't it?
No, it's just the angle of the drawing.
Oh, okay.
It's a rudimentary, it's like a diagram, so it doesn't do a great job. Well, actually, no, because if you look at these are also beams, and you can see how it tapers down to the bottom. You see that?
Oh yeah, that you can see, yeah.
Yeah, all right. Okay, the Gemara is in Nikkei. And here's where it gets a little more involved. Bishlei Malamanda Amar Kishem Shemalamaton Avyon Ama Kach Malamaila Avyon Ama. We will find greater comfort and security following the viewpoint that says it is the same thickness on the bottom and the top. Hainu d'chsiv, that is the meaning of the following pasuk. Uleyachesei hamishkan yama tasa shisha krashim ushne krashim tasa lim kutzois. Let's read the translation. It writes like this: for the back of the tabernacle, the western wall, make 6 beams and 2 beams for the corners. Let's go back to the image for another moment. How many? See if I can zoom out. Okay, here. Take a look at the top now for a moment. This is the Mishkan aligned. The entrance is here on the east, I believe. The back wall is the west.
There's 6.
And the rest is history. This is the south and the northern wall. So this is the western wall. The Torah explicitly says that the west wall has 6 crushing. 1, 2. Can you see my cursor?
6.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. You have 6 crushing. The pasuk makes sense because we're not done yet. What's next is most important. And you shall make 2 beams for the corners of the tabernacle. There needs to be an additional 2 beams in the corner. And so now let's go back to our.
That's not all that wide.
Hold on. Again, we're talking according to the thick. The beams are thick. So we have 6 on the back wall, and there's an additional corner and corner. So all told, this back wall would be 8 crushing. Now, this is relevant just before we go any further, because they don't have the same width and thickness, depth. And so you're going to have to either align it going this way or that way, right? And so you have 6, but it's 8 because you have the 2 corners. Okay, that's what the pasuk says. Bishlema, according to this reading of the pasuk. Now it makes sense. Why? The asi pusya dahani mimalele lesumcha dahani. The width of the beams comes and covers the thickness of those. It's flush. It works out where the thickness of the corner beam interplays nicely with the rest of the structure. I think we can agree that works.
How would that work? They wouldn't line up if it tapered. There'd be a gap.
Hold on, Mark. Now we're not talking about when it tapered. We're first talking about when it's whole. When it's whole, everything works nice. Again, the thickness.
According to the picture.
We're only talking about the top image. The bottom image, you need a kind of
right. I'm talking about the top image. So if you look at the top image, the way they butt into each other, perpendicular,
right?
The edges.
Yes.
It leaves, so it's really 8 beams, which are the same size. And the way the other wall butts into that first wall leaves, it looks according to the picture, leaves a little bit of a gap, not gap, but it's not the thickness of the beam.
You're saying a little. Saying there's a little bit of the corner beam exposed.
Right. It's exactly.
But it's not a little bit. It's half of amma.
Right. But it's half an amma. But is that a problem? Whenever you're dealing with 2 different thickness, you're going to have to decide how they interplay, right? The corner beam, you have. No, but I'm just saying. Let's understand. You have 2 choices. I think either you'll turn this corner beam the other way and you'll lose 1 full amma. half on each side of the width of the entire Mishkan.
I mean, those beams are not square, they're rectangular, so
They're
by
rectangular,
definition.
exactly.
So by definition, when you butt them against each other, there'll be a space. There'll be
Right, but that's not a
room.
but that's not a problem. There's
I'm
no
not saying it is.
yeah.
I-
But you are correct to say that there is a half an amma exposed, or half an amma on each side contributed to the width, to the length of this wall. Correct. But it all works out nice. They plug in flush. There's no gap. There's no space for air to come through. I don't know. It works nicely. That's what the Gemara says. Again, Bishlema, again, from the top. If you say that they were equal on the top and the bottom, and so they have the thickness of an amma. So now, and so the width of the beams covers the thickness of those. It works out. But if you say that the other beam, Mark, this is your question. If you say that the beams were thick on the bottom in amma, but as they rose up, it tapered off to the size of an etzba. If it continues to taper down, high ayil v'high nafik. There's no mikveh here. The other Chabad also has a mikveh, but it's closed now at 10 o'clock. On Hallandale Beach Boulevard. Mile and a half. I'm giving a share now, but you can. Yes. Yeah. High ayil v'high nafik. V'shafilu kitur. I'm sorry, that's the answer. High ayil v'high nafik. Let's see how Rabbi Steinsaltz explains the question. I'll just show you. They don't. If the tops of the crushing taper off, there's going to be an awkward gap between the corner units because it tapers away. Let's say it tapers in the middle. So you're gonna have I don't know what the dimensions are, but if we're talking about a thickness of a amma, so we're talking about 2 to 3 tefach gap. Mark, is that correct?
Well, at the top, it'll be,
If it tapers off to the middle,
one going this way is straight in that dimension, so you only have
no, the
the,
side, the back wall, if they taper up, and I'm assuming they taper up to the middle. So you're going to have between 2 and 3 tfachim of a gap between.
it goes to an
and the
etzba. It goes from one tefa with one amma down to an etzba, and you take half
Right.
of it's a little almost a half a amma gap.
What is
at
almost
the
half
top.
an amma? Correct.
top
Correct.
of-
That's what I'm saying.
Yeah.
One is half
Sort
an
of.
amma, 2 to 3, because I don't know.
So-
Okay, let's.
So half an amma is already that's about 9 to 10 inches.
Yeah,
That's,
so we're talking about a serious gap. This is a big
buffer.
structural issue.
The question is, it seems like it might be just under the magic number of 3 tefachim.
It's true for halachic purposes, but we're just trying to imagine the aesthetics and the engineering of it.
And the structural strength.
So part of the beam would protrude out of the tabernacle. Shayna? Shayna, your phone? All right. So we got a problem. Let's see Rashi. High oil behind nothing. Kivan the keresh shabedorim. Shabbat safon l'mayla kolaba of yav. The keresh who nice and mimiksoya. Roichav ama v'chetzi nimsa roichav keresh al miksoya boilet v'yoyzel adarm el mayla. Chutz mi aviv shal droimi v'chein l'tzafin. Basically, each of these things come to a point in a way that's awkward and not aligned. And so actually, you have a serious little gap over here. So you know what the Gemara answers? The shafi le'leroicha base crushing from Mixoya. What I understand this to be saying, and I'm not exactly clear, I'll be honest, is that they must have aligned in a way where, hold on, let me see if I can find you a picture. Help us out 1 second.
The other picture you had kind of said it, but there's.
No,
hard
but I
to
had a
see
better.
the-
There's a better. Let me see if this has it. No, I'm gonna take another picture and I'm gonna post it.
Second
Hold on, hold on.
picture sort of shows, but doesn't show the gap.
Here, there's better. I think it's better. Bear with me a moment. Thought I posted it, but hold on. Yeah, I posted on the WhatsApp group too, in case anyone wants to take a look before it loads. Here. Here, so here are in the notes this is in the art scroll. And so here he is describing the problem. The corner boards would not line up along their entire height, since the end boards of the northern and southern walls would taper inwards, while the inner wall of the western wall would rise straight up until nearly an amma of the inner face would be visible on the outside. So basically, the way he describes it is that there's going to be this protruding post that's going to extend or poke out into the covering of the Mishkan. And when the Gemara explains that it slopes, hold on. What?
And maybe the one side was flat and the other side had the slope like this, so therefore the outside.
Hold on, one second. Let's let the Gemara give the question and understand the question, and let's see the Gemara's answer. And then we can propose alternatives, but I'm confused. I'm confused without our here. So let's read it.
Which assuming it tapers in the middle, maybe it's tapering to one side.
So he's saying that they seem to taper to fuse into one another in a way that works together, which slopes on two sides. Similarly, those corner boards, in addition to being tapered in their thickness, they were also tapered to the outer side of the width, so they would match the tapered contour of the end board. In other words, the boards that were in the corner were not simply awkwardly tapered, but they were designed to plug in just the gap in just the right way.
So they were like triangular? Were they like triangular?
More like that. I don't know if you can see it.
That's what they seem to be portraying over
It's
here.
flat on one side.
That it was that it had some kind of a triangular effect, eliminating in other words, this, look on the top, this corner, well, you see how they draw it. First of all, hold on, let me just clarify one thing. The way Art Scroll is describing it is not that it comes up to a point in the middle. It's that on the inside, it was flat, on the outside, it tapered downwards. And based on that, you have that awkward piece protruding outside of the structure. And so he describes that it was trimmed so that there was nothing protruding. It was flush. It sealed the corner without being awkward. That's without getting, again, it's a little bit beyond me, but that's what I believe he's explaining. They were sloped.
Flat on the side, angled on the outside.
They were sloped like a mountain, just like a mountain is smooth and all around. So it filled in the corner nicely. That's what I'm understanding over here.
But was the base rectangular and then,
Oh, so now you're
down?
asking, apparently so.
or was it triangular all the way? So they would fit into each other?
I don't
Because if you have the bases rectangular and then start sloping, then you have gaps in between.
On either side.
I hear you. I don't know exactly. What I can tell you, and again, I told you, I've struggled before to understand the exact design. There's a reason why I'm not in a. Anyways, suffice it to say, the awkwardness of the corner beam is corrected by it sloping not just on one side, but on in a way that causes no protrusion on the outside. So when they line up, the additional protrusion is not a problem. Let's take a look at any other. There are other Rishonim that understand the Gemara differently, but I don't think I have the capacity to get it much more complicated than this.
What I can't understand is how the the freestanding beams could hold up like that.
They're not freestanding.
Yeah, they're in the center.
Yeah, the
Oh,
sockets
that's
on
what you mean.
Yeah, how do they? Are they dug into the sand? And
I
if they
don't
dug
know,
into
but I'll
the
tell you,
sand, it's
I'll tell you
quite
this,
hard.
certainly if they're sloped, so then I think it makes a lot of sense that it could stand. Just like anything that has a very wide base and narrow on top should be able to stand.
But
Um,
if we looked at the
but they have to
original
dig it in.
pictures, if I remember, there were two protruding parts on the bottom.
We're
which
going to
may
read
have-
about, yes. So you're saying
if you
that they're
remember
plugged
the
into,
picture of the original.
they're plugged
at the
into
bottom, there were
Adanim.
two- Right. So-
they're plugged into sockets like this.
Now, there was another picture of the individual and.
Yeah, I know,
it
I'm
showed
looking
on
for
the
it.
Bottom,
Here.
here we go.
You know what we should have done? I should have brought like popsicle sticks or some kind of little like, so we could like play with them and build ourselves a mishkan. Or we need to invite an architect or a structural engineer to join our Gemara, a civil engineer, someone to join our Gemara share. I think that's the best option.
Or
Yeah,
we
but I'm
need
not-
the original plans. Actually, this is the original plans in the Torah there.
All right, folks, that's it. We're putting out a bulletin. We need an architect to join our chabura. That'll help a lot.
Did they have
All
a
right.
building or did they have a building permit for this? I don't know.
Moshe issued an emergency. No, it was a temporary structure, so they were able to get away with it. All right, let's see the Gemara. So that's that. So let's do a fast recap. In short, the Gemara just reviewed for us two different viewpoints on how the crushing were designed. Either square rectangular on the top, or it came down, tapered down to a point. Initially, the Gemara worked through the different biblical proof in the psukim that each opinion took to support their viewpoint. We then went to a more practical exploration, which is how did it work practically? The Torah says that there were 6 beams across the back wall, the western wall, and 2 in the corner. And based on our imagination, the way we're imagining it, they would align in an awkward manner, causing a protrusion, and that would be awkward and doesn't sound right. And the Gemara answers that it wasn't simply tapered in the middle, but it was also shaved down. This is how I understand it: shaved down to fit seamlessly and nicely into the corner unit. Some of the other Rishonim have other takes on exactly the way the tapering worked to be more conducive. And again, as soon as we recruit our architect, we can have more. I'm going to also take a look. I'll see there's like different Gemara resources. I'll see if there's anything online that maybe there's some better images that we can look and revisit this tomorrow. Let's jump into the next section of the Gemara, which I believe will be a little bit more simple. It's a famous thing about the Mishkan, and it's good to add to our portfolio. Now let's continue. There's a pasuk that says something very interesting, and Kabbalah likes this pasuk. So the Mishkan, the way the posts connected, they didn't simply plug in to the Adonim, into the brackets, but they also had brichim lekarshe tzela Mishkan Hashenis. They had special planks to connect either planks or wood that would attach and secure it. So they weren't just secured on the bottom, but they also had planks securing them on the side. And V'habriya chatichoin, there was a central bar b'soicha crushing that ran within the crushing, within the beams. Mavriach v'nakatza lekatza, and it ran from one end to the other. And now would be a good time to move this closer to us. So basically, we have, what was the word we used here? We have the brichim, which that's a briach, and these were connecting the beams on the outside to make sure that it was a strong structure. We couldn't chas v'shalom have the Mishkan collapse. But there was also a briach hatichon. There was a beam that ran through each of the kurushim, and not a beam, or whatever you call it, a plank, a beam, a piece of wood that ran in between and secured them from the inside.
So it looks to me quite sturdy. So why does the Gemara say b'derech nesayah?
No, hold on. Sorry. Tana, our tradition teaches us in Brisa Benes haya oimed. This beam's existence was dependent and very much a miracle. How? So let's see Rashi. She'achar shakroshim kulan nisunim ba'adanim. After all of the beams were plugged into their receptacle brackets. Litzafen lamarav ledarim, and it was aligned. It was set up, the north, the south, and the west. They would then thread through or snake through this middle inner briach, umavriach l'shloishos haruchais, and miraculously it would snake its way through all the three different directions. This is an impossibility. And miraculously, this wood, every time they would reconstruct the Mishkan, would bend and weave its way or worm its way or snake its way on those angular turns and manage to be a single beam threading itself through the southern side of the Mishkan, the western side of the Mishkan, and then back on the northern side of the Mishkan. We're all laughing and smirking because we cannot possibly fathom a solid piece of wood doing that. We could imagine something that has a, how do you call it? If it has joints, here, Doctor, you're muted, we can't hear you.
Bring it in.
If it had some kind of joints, we could imagine a snake, you know, like this, the plumbing device that is able to snake through. So that we understand. But a solid piece of wood snaking, and again, I'm showing you the screen along the bottom.
Unless it was, still supple and green and, not dried wood, then theoretically, for some branches, thinner branches could.
Right.
Bend
And so the case the Gemara is making is that was not the case, because for 40 years they had that same briach hatichain, and for it to work, every time they construct and deconstruct the Mishkan, it must have been a miracle. Again, today I'm sure we could create some kind of technology, some kind of thing that could do it. But in those days, they had a technology too. It was called the miracles, Hashem's intervention. As Rashi says, this is an impossibility. And miraculously, it snaked its way around. Let's see if there's any. Okay, let's see Taisus really fast. We have 2 more minutes. This is a debate. This is dissenting with another brisa that says like this: There's another brisa in short that says it wasn't the same single beam that snaked all the way around. Each side had a continuous briach, and that would be a more natural and not miraculous thing. I'm paraphrasing Tosfos. I hope I got it right for you, but that is the crux of what's going on. All right, yeah. So the Maram just explains more or less what we just said. So that is the definition of benes haya oimed, but I'm 99% certain that Chumash Rashi, or I should say Rashi on the Chumash, quotes this Gemara and says benes haya oimed. It was a miracle, that it literally was mavriach min hakatza lakatza. Hasidic language and Kabbalistic language says that emes is the briach hatichoin, that's mavriach min hakatza lakatza. Something that's true is always true under all scenarios and all circumstances, and truth doesn't need to be modified because it's something that's enduring, just like the briach hatichain manages to do its job on all different angles. In even more Kabbalistic terminology, it's referred to as tiferes, and it describes certain mystical dynamics that are consistent and throughout. And in the Kabbalah of the Avot, Avraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov is called Tiferes, the Bria Chatichon, because Yaakov, and one of the proofs or one of the elements of that is because Yaakov, all of his children remained within Yiddishkeit, proving that there was a certain consistency with all of the different types of children, the different personalities and different dynamics. What was consistent was that they all stayed within the Jewish, I should say, within the Abrahamic faith. So that's just a little.
Tiferet is one of the Sfirot.
Tiferet, yeah.
And which side is is it on the right side or the left side? On the masculine side or the feminine
if you're looking at the typical Kabbalistic diagram of the 10 Sfirot, Tiferet is in the middle. Tiferet is the blend.
It's together with Yesod and Shekhinah.
Yes. So Tiferet is the blend, the fusion of Chesed and Gvura, of kindness and severity. Sometimes it's described as Rachamim. What is Rachamim? Mercy, where the person isn't deserving of your grace, but you give it anyway. So Rachamim says, I understand that there is a case to be made for Gevurah, for strictness. I understand that he doesn't really deserve Chesed, but sometimes you'll still agree to give Chesed, to give some kind of compassion. And that's why they say that in Kedusha, there's always going to be a little bit of a tendency towards the right, because the blend of the two many times concludes to give Chesed, but not always. And my dear friends, that concludes an entire hour of study of the Talmud. I want to thank you all for your assistance in navigating this Gemara. Good news, we are not yet done talking about the Mishkan, but I'm glad we ended off on a lighter on a lighter facet of the Mishkan. So in a nutshell, today we had an off the recording discussion about the history or the unwritten history of Chamisha Asar B'Shvat, Tu B'Shvat, from the Mishnah to the Kabbalistic era to the modern era. And then we talked about the design of the Krushim, not so much as they relate to the wagons, but as they relate to the design of the Mishkan. And then in closing, we spoke of the Bria Chatichon that snaked its way around, or as Tosfos quotes another brisa, saying that it wasn't a miracle, there just was a single beam, 3 single beams on each of the 3 walls that were closed. My dear friends, this concludes today's Gemara. Thank you all for joining. Shalom Ber. In just a moment, you're invited to when I end the link, you're invited to rejoin to study today's Chumash. Again, my gratitude to everyone here who makes this my favorite highlight of the day. And I want to wish you a wonderful day. Ayasher Koyach.